Arunachala Śrī Aruṇācala kāntam mirumbupōṟ kavarndeṉai viḍāmal kalandeṉō ḍiruppā Arunachala Arunachala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala Arunachala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala Śrī Aruṇācala.
Namaskaram. That was Sadhu Om singing verse 16 of Akṣaramaṇamālai, which is the verse that I'm going to be talking about today. The meaning of this verse is, the verse is, kāntam mirumbupōṟ, kavarndu eṉai viḍāmal, kalandu, eṉōḍu, iruppāy, Arunachala, if we split it up into individual words. What the literal meaning of that is, Arunachala, like a magnet iron, forcibly seizing me, uniting without leaving, may you be with me. That's the literal meaning. The implied meaning is, like a magnet grasping iron by its natural power of attraction, forcibly seizing, grasping, captivating, or attracting me by the captivating power of your grace, uniting me with you without ever leaving or letting go of me, may you be eternally one with me. So that is the implied meaning. As in many of the previous and subsequent verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai, in this verse, Bhagavan clearly implies that it is only by the grace of by the power of Arunachalā's grace that we can surrender ourselves completely to him, by turning our entire attention back within to see him as he actually is, namely as our own real nature, shining in our heart as our fundamental awareness I am, and thereby merge forever as one with him. Just to illustrate this, I'll go through a few of the previous verses, the gist of the previous verses, just to show how Bhagavan is emphasizing this need for grace. For example, in verse 12, he implies that since Arunachala is the only one who actually exists, the one without a second, ekameva advitiyam, if the five sense thieves enter our heart, this must be only his trick. In this context, his sudu, or trick, implies maya, which is the power that deceives and allures our mind, drawing it out towards the deceptive attractions of the world of sense impressions. So the implication in verse 12 is that since Arunachala alone actually exists, the power of Maya is his power and therefore subservient to him. So it is only by the power of his grace that we can escape the snares and delusions of his Maya. That is, since our varana, that means covering, veiling, or concealing, which is the primary and most fundamental power of Maya, is nothing but ego or mind, the false awareness I am this body. That is, it's this false awareness I am this body, but covers our real nature. But our real nature is just the pure awareness I am. But when we conflate an object, this body, with the pure awareness I am, that covers or conceals or veils our real nature. So that is what is called avarana. Maya is said to have two powers, avarana and vikshepa. So the primary power is avarana, the veiling. So that is nothing but ego or mind. Our very nature as ego is to be always deluded by Maya. That is because we ourselves are Maya. Our very nature is to be always deluded by Maya. That is, both by its primary power, avarana, and consequently by its concomitant secondary power, vikshepa, or scattering, which disperses our mind as innumerable thoughts, which are what constitute the internal and external worlds of phenomena. So without the intervention of Arunachala, who is our own real nature, Atma-vichara, we as ego will never either be willing or able to escape the clutches of Maya. I'll just explain this in a little more detail. That is, as Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Uludunapadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. If oneself is not a form, who can see their forms and how? That means we are aware of names and forms that seem to us to constitute the world and God, only when we take ourselves to be a form. And we take ourselves to be a form only when we rise as ego. So in the view, as ego, there are two defining characteristics of ego. As ego, we are always aware of ourselves as I am this body. We always identify ourselves with a particular body. And body means, in this context, doesn't mean just the physical body. It means all the five sheaths, because we never experience a physical body as I without the other four sheaths. That is, it's always, we never experience a dead body as I, it's always a living body. And we never experience a sleeping body as I, it always seems to be awake. So even in dream, our mind, our body, we seem to be awake. So when we're awake, there's mind, intellect and will are all operating within this body. So all these five go together, as Bhagavan said in verse 5 of Uludunapadu. So this false awareness, I am this body, is what conceals our real nature. So this is the covering, the avarana shakti, the power of covering. This is the essential power of Maya. But as soon as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we are consequently aware of other things. So these are the two defining characteristics of ego. Firstly, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. Secondly, we are consequently aware of other things, which are what which are what Bhagavan describes as forms. Forms means anything that can be distinguished from any other thing. So he's not just talking about physical forms. Every thought, every feeling, every idea, it's got certain distinguishing characteristics that distinguish it from every other thing. So it's a form. So we're aware of forms. In other words, we're aware of multiplicity only when we're aware of ourselves as I am this body. Being aware of ourselves as I am this body, that is our varana, the basic power of Maya. But that is always accompanied by vikshepa, which is the scattering or dispersing power of Maya. That is, as soon as we're aware of ourselves as I am this body, we're aware of so much multiplicity. So many other things seem to exist. So this is why Bhagavan often used to say, Maya is nothing but mind or ego. That is, Maya is not something extraneous to ourself. It is ourself as ego, that is Maya. And of course, this Maya is not real, but so long as we experience ourselves as ego, Maya seems to be real. And it's the very nature of ourself as ego to be deluded by Maya. So we need some power greater than Maya to free us from Maya. That is the power of grace. So that is the implication here. When Bhagavan refers to, says, this is your trick. He means this is your Maya. Since it is Arunachal's Maya, Arunachala alone has the authority to remove that Maya. And the power by which he removes Maya is the power of grace. Both of those, the power of grace and the power of Maya, are actually not two different powers. But the Maya is, when we rise as ego, we misuse that power of grace to create all this multiplicity, take ourselves to be a form of body and thereby to create this multiplicity. So the Maya is simply a misuse of the power of grace, which is our own real nature. So it is only grace in its original pure form, undistorted form, that can overcome Maya. So the implication in this verse 12 is that it's only by his grace that we can overcome Maya. And this is, if we go through Akṣaramaṇamālai verse by verse, we will find this is the implication in so many verses. So I'll just continue. In the next verse, in verse 13, he likewise implies that being the only one who actually exists, Arunachala is the true import or referent of Omkara. the sacred syllable om, and therefore that for which there is nothing equal, similar, or superior. So he cannot be known by anyone other than himself. The implication, therefore, is that we cannot know him except by being him. So as ego, we can never know him as he actually is, and hence we need to surrender ourselves entirely to him, thereby allowing ourselves to be devoured by him. However, we'll be willing to surrender ourselves only when we have all-consuming love for him alone. But since the nature of ourself as ego is always to be attached to other things, having all-consuming love for him alone is contrary to our ego nature. So such love can come only from him alone. Therefore, this is another reason why his grace is absolutely essential. That is, some power greater than this ego has to overcome our ego nature. That power can only be the power of our real nature, which is Arunachal's grace. Therefore, in the next verse, verse 14, he prays to Arunachala, saying that it is his duty, like a mother, to give him his grace and thereby to take charge of him as his very own. Since his grace is the infinite love that he has for each one of us as himself, giving grace implies giving us the same love for him that he has for us, namely love for him as our own real nature. That is, he loves us as himself, as his own real nature. So his giving us his grace is giving us the same love, the love for him as our own real nature. Since it is only by such love given by him, but we will be willing to give ourselves wholly to him, and since he will not take complete charge of us as his very own until we are willing to give ourselves wholly to him, the implication is that it is only by his giving us his grace in the form of all-consuming love for him that he can discharge his motherly duty to take complete charge of us. So in so many ways, Bhagavan is repeatedly emphasizing the need for grace. Then in the next verse, verse 15, that's a verse prior to the one we're going to be talking about today, that's a verse we talked about last time, he gives us another reason why we as ego can never see him or know him as he actually is. That is, the nature of ourself as ego is to always look outwards. So we can only see things other than ourselves, just as the eye can only see objects other than itself, and can never see itself. Arunachala, of course, is not anything other than ourself, but as Bhagavan describes in that verse, Arunachala is the eye to the eye, meaning that it is the light of pure awareness, I am, which shines within the mind or ego, giving us as ego the light of awareness by which we know all other things. Since the nature of ourself as ego is to always see ourself as an object, namely a body consisting of 5 sheaths, a physical body, life, mind, intellect, and will, and consequently to see other objects ranging from gross to subtle, corresponding to each of the 5 sheaths, as ego, we can never see ourselves as we actually are. What we actually are is Arunachala. So as ego, we cannot see him. So though as ego we cannot see him, he always sees us as we actually are, namely as himself. And he sees us thus without any eye or instrument of sight, but just by being himself, because he is pure awareness, which always knows itself, not by an act of knowing, but just by being itself. Therefore, in verse 15, Bhagavan asked rhetorically, Kannuku kannai kanindri kānu unai kānu vadeva. That means, who can see you, who, being the eye to the eye, sees without eyes, thereby implying that no one other than himself can see him as he actually is. So does this mean that we can never see him as he actually is? No. It simply implies that as ego we can never see him as he actually is. But since he is what we actually are, we can see him just by being as we actually are instead of rising as ego. But how can we cease rising as ego and thereby remain as we actually are? Nothing that we can do as ego can enable us to cease rising as ego, because instead of trying to do instead of trying to do anything as ego, we can cease rising just by turning our entire attention back within and thereby subsiding back into Arunachala, the source from which we have risen. That is, as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uludunaptu, ego is uruvatrape, a formless phantom or formless evil spirit. And urupatri undam, urupatri nikum, urupatri undu mika ongum, uruvittu urupatram. That he goes on to say that in the verse. That means grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on form, it grows abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. So the implication of this is that the nature of our self as ego is to be constantly grasping form, which means grasping things other than ourself, because we are ego is a formless phantom. So if it grasps forms, those forms are obviously things other than itself. And by grasping such things, we are doing action. That is the outward movement of our attention towards things other than ourselves. That is action. However, in the same verse, he then says, "Tedinal otum pidicum." If sought, it will take flight, thereby implying that if we as ego seek, investigate, or attend to ourselves, we will take flight or run away, meaning that we will subside and dissolve back into the source from which we rose, namely our own being, I am, which is Arunachala. Therefore, grasping or attending to anything other than ourself is an action done by us as ego, whereas attending to ourself is not an action, but a cessation, not only of all action, but also of ego, the doer of all action. So this is why this practice of self-investigation, of being self-attentive, is not a doing, it is just a being. So this is why Bhagavan often said that we need not do anything, but should just be as we actually are, meaning that we should not attend to anything, meaning that we should just attend to ourselves and thereby subside back into our being, which is what always shines as our fundamental awareness, I am. That is, attending to anything other than ourselves is a doing, an action, whereas attending to ourselves causes ego to subside. So it's a cessation both of the action and of the doer of action, namely ego. However, since the very nature of ourself as ego is to always grasp or attend to things other than ourselves, how are we to attend to ourselves? We attend to other things under the sway of our vishaya vasanas, our volitional inclinations to experience vishayas, objects of phenomena, which are the seeds that sprout as likes, dislikes, desires, aversions, attachments, fears, and so on. So it is only under the sway of love to surrender ourselves completely that we can attend to ourselves. That is, it's under the sway of vasana, the liking for other things, but we attend to other things. It's only under the sway of love to surrender ourselves completely, but we can attend to ourselves. But from where is such love to come? It cannot come from ourself as ego, because as ego, our nature is to always desire things other than ourselves. So it can only come from ourselves as we actually are, namely from Arunachala. So in so many ways, Bhagavan is implying the need for grace. In other words, it can be given to us only by his grace, which is why Bhagavan ends verse 15 with a single word of prayer, ha, which means see or look, thereby implying that Arunachala should look at us with his arokan, the eye of his grace. Since his grace is the infinite love that he has for us as himself, his looking at us with his eye of grace is his giving us, beloved, to turn back and look deep within ourselves in order to see him as he is seeing us, namely as one indivisible whole, in which there is not even the slightest trace of any separation between him and us. Thus, in these 4 verses, 12 to 15, as in so many other verses of Akṣaramaṇamālai, Bhagavan clearly implies that without the grace of Arunachala, we as ego can never be saved from ourselves. We, of course, must be willing to yield ourselves to his grace by trying to turn back within to see him shining in our heart as our own being, I am. But even to be willing to do so, we require his grace. The onus is therefore on him. If he does not attract us as a magnet attracts iron, what can we do by ourselves to escape the clutches of his Maya? Even the thought that we should escape her clutches, let alone the desire to do so, would not occur to us but for his grace. So powerful is the deceptive allurement of Maya in all her myriad forms, but we will continue reveling in her charms for endless lives, as we've been doing till now, in spite of all the suffering and misery that she causes us along the way, until he looks at us with his eye of grace, thereby attracting us back to him, back to himself. Therefore, in continuation of these earlier verses, in this 16th verse, he prays to Arunachala to attract him as a magnet attracts iron, without ever letting go of him. Kāntam means magnet, irumbu means iron, and pole is a particle of comparison that means like, similar to, or as. So kāntam mirumbupōṟ means, literally means magnet iron-like, thereby implying as a magnet attracts iron. Kavarndu is an adverbial participle that means seizing, catching, grasping, taking by force, capturing, stealing, plundering, attracting, charming, captivating, or taking control of. And eṉai is a poetic abbreviation of eṉai, the accusative or second case form of a first person singular pronoun. So it means me. And hence, kavarndu, eṉai, or in normal prose, eṉai kavarndu, that's the normal prose order, eṉai would come before. It's only for poetry, sometimes words are switched around. So kavarndu eṉai means attracting me or forcibly seizing me. Therefore, kāntam mirumbupōṟ, kavarndu eṉai means forcibly seizing me like a magnet iron, thereby implying attracting or forcibly seeing me as a magnet attracts or forcibly seizes iron. Then the next verse is the next word is viḍāmal. Viḍāmal is a negative adverbial participle that means not leaving or not letting go. And kalandu is an adverbial participle that means joining, uniting, mixing, combining, or being absorbed. So viḍāmal kalandu means uniting without leaving, and implies uniting with me without ever leaving or letting go of me. eṉōḍu is associative form of the first person singular pronoun, so it means with me. And iruppāy is the second person singular future form of iru, be, exist or remain, so it literally means you will be. But it's used here, as in so many other verses, Bhagavan often uses the second person plural form in the sense of the optative. The optative of iru would be iruppāyaha. So the same iruppāy with aha added to it. But even if the aha is dropped, it still implies, in this context, it implies the optative. So it literally means, so it means may you be. Therefore, eṉōḍu iruppāy means may you be with me. And in this context, it implies, may you be eternally one with me. Thus, viḍāmal kalandu, eṉōḍu, iruppāy, uniting without leaving, may you be with me. That's what it means. And it implies uniting me with you without ever leaving or letting go of me. May you be eternally one with me. So the whole verse, kāntam mirumbupōṟ, kavarndeṉai viḍāmal, kalandeṉō, ḍiruppā Arunachala, means Arunachala, like a magnet iron, forcibly seizing me, uniting without leaving, may you be with me. Thereby implying Arunachala, like a magnet grasping iron by its natural power of attraction, forcibly seizing, grasping, captivating, or attracting me by the captivating power of your grace, uniting me with you without ever leaving or letting go of me, may you be eternally with me, or eternally one with me. Arunachala is a supremely powerful magnet, and his very nature is to forcibly attract and catch hold of ego, the soul or jiva. Just as the nature of a physical magnet is to forcibly attract and catch hold of any piece of iron. Though in the outward-looking view of ourself as this body-bound ego, Arunachala seems to be, appears in the form of a hill, his real nature, or swarupa, is always shining in our heart as our own being, I am. So his nature as the divine magnet is to attract us not only to his outward form, but more importantly, is to attract us, attract and pull us inwards to face his swarupa, his real form, the one and only reality. And thereby to devour us, as Bhagavan explains in verse 10 of Arunachala Patikam. What he sings in verse 10 of Arunachala Patikam, Patanam pudumai. I have seen a wonder. We're vali kāntam, kānta paravatam. The magnetic hill forcibly seizes the soul. Orutaram ideṇai, Orutaram ideṇai ortidum wherein shesteye oduki. That means subduing the mischievous activity of the soul who thinks of it once. Oru tanadu abhimukhamaha itu. That means pulling to face towards itself the one here implies the only one who actually exists, the only one that is real. Ade tambol acchalamadu sedu, making it motionless like itself, making that soul motionless like itself. Ab innuir bali kolum, it accepts that sweet soul as sacrificial offering. Ichten, what is this? That's an exclamation of wonder. Ortumin viḍāmal. That means, O souls, be saved by thinking, Orukal, Ulam adil olir yib we koli arunamagiriye. So that last sentence means, O souls, be saved thinking of the great Aruna hill, this killer of the soul who shines in the heart. That's the literal meaning of the verse. So the implied meaning is, I have seen a wonder, the magnetic hill that seizes or forcibly attracts the soul, subduing the mischievous outward flowing mental activity of the soul who thinks of it once, pulling, dragging, or attracting that soul inwards to be tanadu abhimukham. That means facing towards itself. the one here means the one who is unique and peerless. It can also mean the one who alone actually exists, namely the one infinite pure awareness that shines in the heart as I. And thereby making it the soul, achala, motionless like itself, it accepts and consumes that sweet, spiritually ripened and pure soul as bali. Bali means food offered in sacrifice. So when he says he accepts as bali, that implies he swallows that soul. Because having worked within that soul is now well cooked, well ripened, and fit to be consumed by him. So then he will accept it as a fitting offering. What a wonder is this, O souls, be saved by thinking of the great Aruna hill, this killer of the soul, who shines in the heart. Who shines in the heart implies who shines in the heart as the heart, namely the fundamental awareness of being, I am. So in this verse, Bhagavan very, very clearly charts out how Arunachal's grace works from within our heart by making us think of him, and then that starts a process by which he slowly, by drawing our attention back within, he subdues the outward going activity, and thereby it turns us towards himself, makes us motionless like himself, and then he swallows us. So, though Arunachala appears outwardly in the form of a hill, he is actually our own being, our fundamental awareness, I am. So unlike an ordinary magnet, his magnetic power of attraction does not depend on physical proximity. He catches us in the web of his grace just by making us think of him. If by his grace we think of him even once, he will begin to subdue our chesta. Chesta means the activity. In this context, it implies the pravritti or outward going activity of our mind, by drawing our attention back within to face towards himself, the one who alone actually exists, shining eternally in our heart as I am. Thus he will make us motionless like himself, and then he will feed upon us, thereby absorbing us into himself as himself. So this is how his magnetic power of attraction works. It pulls us back within to face him in our heart, where he is always waiting to devour us as soon as we see him as he actually is, namely at the real nature of ourself, Atma-vichara. However, to see him thus, we need to be willing to look deep within ourselves and thereby surrender ourselves entirely to him. So with our whole heart, we need to cry out to him in prayer, as Bhagavan does in this verse. Kāntam mirumbupōṟ, kavarndeṉai viḍāmal, kalandeṉō ḍiruppā Arunachala. Arunachala, like a magnet grasping iron by its natural power of attraction, forcibly seizing or attracting me by the captivating power of your grace, uniting me with you without ever leaving or letting go of me. May you be eternally one with me. Being insentient, jada, iron is powerless to resist the pull of a magnet, whereas ego is not jada, but a form of awareness, albeit not real awareness, chit, but only a semblance of awareness, chidabhasa. So as ego, we are free to resist the magnetic pull of Arunachala. That is, though by his grace, he is always pulling our attention inwards to face him as he actually is, under the sway of our vishaya vasanas, we resist his pull by rushing outwards, constantly attending to anything other than ourselves. Therefore, we must be willing to yield ourselves to his inward pull by trying our best to hold on to him in our heart, and hence this prayer. As Bhagavan often used to say, bhakti is the mother of jnana, and this is very clearly illustrated in this verse. Since Arunachala attracts and pulls us to himself by arousing love for him in our heart, the first clause of this verse, kāntam, mirumbupōṟ, kavarndu, eṉai, attracting or grasping me like a magnet attracting or grasping iron, that is a prayer for true all-consuming love, bhakti, for him. And the result of such bhakti is jnana, the state of pure awareness, in which we have merged in him and remain inseparably one with him, as implied in the rest of this verse. Viḍāmal, kalandu, eṉōḍu, iruppāy. Uniting me with you, without ever leaving or letting go of me, may you be eternally one with me, Arunachala. That is, we cannot remain firmly and unshakably fixed as pure awareness, jnana, without having all-consuming love, bhakti, for him. And since infinite love is his real nature, whatever love we may have for him can come only from him. So we need him to arouse love for him in our heart by attracting and pulling us inwards towards him, like a magnet attracting a piece of iron towards itself. Just as iron is the one substance that constitutes both a magnet and an ordinary piece of iron, such it, pure being, which is pure awareness, I am, is the one substance, porol or vastu, of both Arunachala and ourself, as Bhagavan implies in verse 24 of Upadesha, in which he says, Irkum ekayal isa jivagal orupole ava undipara upadi unaveva undipara. That means, by existing nature, God and soul are just one substance. The word he uses, the substance, is porol. In Sanskrit, he uses the word vastu. They both mean the same. It means that the one real substance. In other words, Brahman. So we and God are just one substance. Only adjunct awareness is different. That is, it's only because we mistake ourselves to be this body, but we seem to be different to God. So the difference between a magnet and an ordinary piece of iron is that the magnetic particles in a magnet are all aligned to face in one direction, allowing its magnetic nature to manifest. Whereas the magnetic particles in an ordinary piece of iron are scattered to face in many directions, thereby obscuring its magnetic nature. Likewise, the difference between Arunachala, who is God, and ourself, the jiva, is that being pure awareness, Arunachala is always facing inwards towards itself alone, because in its clear view, nothing other than itself exists. So there's nothing else, nothing external to itself that could ever that it could ever face or attend to. Whereas the attention of ourself as ego is always scattered outwards, away from ourself, under the sway of our Vishaya vasanas, to face in many different directions, thereby obscuring our real nature as pure awareness. However, when a magnet attracts and grasps an ordinary piece of iron, holding it firmly without leaving it, the ordinary magnet will also become a magnet because all its magnetic particles will be aligned by the magnet to face in one direction, namely towards the magnet itself. Likewise, if we're attracted and pulled by Arunachala towards himself, our entire attention will be drawn back within to face our real nature, which is Arunachala himself, and thus we will merge in him, becoming one with him in such a way that we will never be able to leave or be separated from him. If the ordinary piece of iron is separated from a magnet, it will lose its temporarily induced magnetism, but it can become a permanent magnet by being persistently stroked against the magnet in one direction, because such unidirectional stroking will permanently align all its magnetic particles to face in one direction. Likewise, until we're attracted to Arunachala so strongly that we merge and become one with him, if we persistently try to turn our entire attention in just one direction, namely towards ourself alone, our mind and heart will thereby be gradually purified and realigned in such a way that we are ever more strongly attracted and pulled towards him, and thus we will become fit to merge in him as him, thereby remaining forever inseparably one with him. How strongly a piece of iron is attracted and pulled towards a magnet depends on how pure it is. If it is pure iron, it will be strongly attracted, whereas if it is rusty or consists predominantly of other impurities, it will barely be affected at all by the magnet's power of attraction. Likewise, how strongly we're attracted and pulled inwards by the magnetic attraction of Arunachala depends on how pure our mind is. The purer the mind, the more strongly we'll be attracted and drawn to him in our heart. Whereas if our mind is very impure, we will feel little or no attraction towards him. The impurities in our mind are our Vishaya vasanas, and the stronger they are, the more strongly we'll be inclined to rush outwards and roam about outside, seeking happiness in Vishayas, objects or phenomena. And the less we'll be inclined to turn back within to see happiness as our own being, I am, which is the real nature of Swarupa, of Arunachala. Therefore, it is only to the extent that our mind is purified by weakening our Vishaya vasanas that we will be attracted by Arunachala to look deep within our heart to see him shining there as ourself. So how is our mind to be purified? It can be purified only by his grace, because his grace is the light of pure awareness that is always shining in our heart as our own being, I am. So he alone can give us the clarity to recognize.
Yeah, but Michael James,
sorry,
his grace, we can only obtain his grace through self-inquiry. We have to start the journey.
His grace starts the journey. We have to travel the journey. That is, he is drawing us towards him, but we have to play our part. That is, we are free to resist. He's always attracting us to him.
Yeah.
But we are free either to yield ourselves to him and allow ourselves to be attracted to him, or to be drawn outwards towards other things. So but he is always playing his part. He's got the major role, but we have to cooperate with his grace. Otherwise, if we're constantly trying to go outwards, we're misusing his grace, the power of his grace, we're misusing it to know things other than ourselves. That's why Bhagavan often said, grace is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Without grace, this is not possible. But that doesn't mean that we don't have our part to play. We also have to play our part. We have to cooperate with grace. So I'll just continue what I was saying. So how is our mind to be purified? It can be purified only by his grace, because his grace is the light of pure awareness that is always shining in our heart as our own being, I am. So he alone can give us the clarity to recognize that happiness does not exist in anything, in any other thing, but only in ourselves. Therefore, even when our mind is extremely impure, being clouded by a dense fog of Vishaya vasanas, he gradually works within us over the course of many lives to weaken our Vishaya vasanas by making us repeatedly see the unsatisfactory nature of whatever fleeting happiness we seem to get from things other than ourselves. As our inclinations, vasanas, to seek happiness in other things, Vishayas, are thereby gradually weakened, our mind is consequently purified, enabling the clarity born of his grace to shine ever more brightly in his heart. And this clarity is what makes us fit to be pulled inwards by his magnetic power of attraction. In order to attract iron to itself, a magnet need not do anything, but just has to be as it is, because its very nature is to attract iron. Likewise, to attract us to itself, Arunachala need not do anything, but just has to be as it is, because its very nature is to attract us. It attracts us because its being and our being are one. So it is ourself as we actually are. And our very nature is to love ourselves more than we could ever love any other thing. However, so long as we rise as ego, we mistake ourselves to be a body, and hence we do not recognize Arunachala as ourself. Therefore, mistaking him to be something other than ourselves, we are unable to experience the full power of his magnetic attraction. The nature of ourself as ego is to be attracted only to those things that we believe will make us happy. When our mind is clouded by a dense fog of Vishaya vasanas, we lack the inner clarity, the clarity of viveka, correct judgment or ability to distinguish what is real from what is unreal, to recognize that happiness exists only within ourselves. And therefore we wrongly believe that we can obtain happiness from things outside ourselves, namely from the objects or phenomena of the world. Therefore, it is only to the extent to which our mind is purified that we will begin to recognize that happiness does not actually exist in anything other than ourselves. And it is only to the extent that we recognize this that we will be attracted to look deep within ourselves. In other words, Arunachala is our own being, I am. So we will be able to experience the inward pulling power of his magnetic attraction only to the extent that our mind is cleansed of its Vishaya vasanas, whose nature is to drive our attention outwards to seek happiness in things other than ourselves. So long as our Vishaya vasanas, inclinations to seek happiness in things other than ourselves, are still relatively strong, in order to avoid being swayed by them, we need to cling firmly to him in our heart, where he is always shining as our own being, I am. This state in which we cling firmly to him is compared to a baby monkey, Markada, clinging firmly to its mother for safety and protection. So clinging in this way is called mākadaṇāya, the monkey principle or monkey method. However, as we go deeper in the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender, our Vishaya vasanas are thereby gradually weakened, and our Sat vasana, inclination to seek happiness only in our own being, is correspondingly strengthened. And thus deep inner clarity, which is the nature of ourself as pure awareness, shines forth with ever-increasing brightness, by the light of which we're able to recognize more and more clearly that the inward pull of his grace is far more powerful than our own efforts to cling to him could ever be. As a result of this clarity, therefore, our inclination and ability to yield ourselves to him, to yield ourselves wholly to him, and thereby to depend entirely upon his grace, becomes stronger and stronger. This state in which we depend entirely upon him is compared to a baby cat, Madjala, who cannot hold on to its mother and who therefore depends entirely upon her to protect it and carry it to safety. So depending on his grace in this way is called Madjala, the cat principle or cat method. So long as we are not able to surrender ourselves entirely to Arunachala, we need to cling to him in our heart as firmly as we can. But as we thereby gain greater and greater clarity and recognize the inadequacy of our own efforts to cling to him, we gradually become fit to transition from a mākadaṇāya, monkey method, to a Madjala, cat method. Regarding this, Bhagavan said, as recorded by Murugan in verse 696 of Guru Vachaka Kavai, I'll just read the meaning, I won't go through the exact meaning of the Tamil. Those who have attained jnana siddhi means the accomplishment of self-knowledge, in this very life, when attachment has ceased, by the power of God's grace, without making any effort or endeavoring to do any spiritual practice, by the blemishless baby cat method, namely by depending entirely upon his grace, like a kitten depending on its mother to come and carry it to safely, would have practiced devotion or strived as a slave or devotee in former lives, like a baby monkey which clings firmly to its mother for safety and protection. As Bhagavan implies by saying this, in order to gain the strength of bhakti, love to surrender ourselves completely to Arunachala, and vairagya, freedom from desire for anything else, but is required for us to yield ourselves to him without ever rising to know or do anything else, knowing clearly that he will certainly do everything that is necessary to save us when we surrender ourselves in such a manner to him, like a kitten who depends entirely upon its mother to protect it and to protect and safeguard it. Over the course of many lives, we need to persistently practice clinging tenaciously to him in our heart, like a baby monkey who clings tenaciously to its mother for safety and protection. Such tenacious monkey-style by such tenacious monkey-style devotion, we will gradually gain the maturity to recognize clearly that all our efforts to cling firmly to self-attentiveness can only lead us to the point where we subside within, thereby losing all inclination to rise and go outwards to know anything other than ourselves or to do anything whatsoever. And that it is only when we reach such a point of complete surrender that his grace will rise from within as the infinitely clear light of pure awareness, thereby pulling us back into itself, into the heart, like a magnet pulling a needle towards itself, and completely absorbing us in itself as itself, in such a way that we can never leave it. Therefore, the more we cling tenaciously to self-attentiveness and thereby subside deep within, the more clearly we will recognize the inadequacy of our own efforts, and the more we will consequently become willing to yield ourselves to him and thereby to depend entirely on his grace, like a kitten depending on its mother. It is in such a state of transition from monkey-style devotion to kitten-style surrender that the prayer expressed by Bhagavan in the 16th verse of Arunachala Akṣaramaṇamālai will well up in our heart. By my repeated efforts to cling to you like a baby monkey clinging to its mother, I have discovered that I do not have sufficient strength to cling to you uninterruptedly without ever leaving you. So like a kitten depending on its mother to carry it to safely, I depend on you to pull me to you like a magnet pulling a piece of iron to itself, and thereby to unite me with yourself without ever letting go of me, so that you may be forever one with me. Om Namo Bhagavate Śrī Aruṇācala Ramanaya.